Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dime Sportsbook. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 115 event, which takes place in Rotterdam, Netherlands. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will break down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Looking back at our last event, we lost 1 unit for UFC Fight Night 114 after going 0-1 on our premium bet. We also won our 1 unit free bet on the Herrera-Ronaldo won't go the distance prop. Back to the present, UFC Fight Night 115 features a 12-fight card in total and will be aired exclusively on UFC Fight Pass this Saturday afternoon. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking things off in the lightweight division on the preliminary card is a bout between Thibault Gowdy, who is 11-3, and Andrew Holbrook, who is 12-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Holbrook minus 185, the comeback on Gowdy at plus 145, and that was at our sponsored sportsbook, 5dimes.eu. So make sure you guys check those guys out as always. And right now over at 5 Dimes, it looks like it's Holbrook minus 170. The comeback on Gowdy is at plus 140. So line margins have tightened up a little bit. Not a tremendous amount of action coming in either way here. I don't blame people out there that not want to bet this fight. I mean, this is an extremely difficult fight to bet because it's hard to trust both guys. So it looks like a little bit more action coming in on Gowdy. And if I was going to bet this fight, honestly, that's the way I would go as well. It's dog or pass. But the problem here is, man, Gowdy has an atrocious chin. It's really bad. I mean, he's only been officially knocked out once in his career, on his record, pro record at least. But I mean, his chin is so bad that he has been rocked and subbed. So he's the type of guy that can get submitted because he gets damaged on the feet as well. But outside of that, Gowdy's a really talented fighter. I mean, I'm impressed with him offensively at times. The guy has good stand-up. He has okay offensive wrestling. He's just a very complete fighter. He's been training at Jackson's camp as well. So he has a lot of good training partners. There's a lot of things to like about Gowdy. It's just defensively, he gets clipped on that chin, and then, I mean, the fight changes completely for him. He either gets subbed or knocked out. So that's the concern with Gowdy. Holbrook, you could say a lot of the same stuff about him as well. The guy is a pretty solid fighter, has impressive wins on his resume so far in the UFC. He's been a little bit up and down. And the most impressive win, most of us realize it's against Jake Matthews. I never thought he would honestly be able to get a decision over a guy like that. I mean, it was a close fight, but I mean, he brought it, and he definitely performed better than we all thought. And to me, Jake Matthews is a serious prospect. So that tells you the talent level Holbrook possesses as well. I mean, the guy is definitely a very solid fighter. It's just his chin is atrocious as well. He gets clipped, he gets put out. Outside of that though, Holbrook, I mean, he's a little slow on the feet, but he has a little bit of power. He's really not much of a threat on the feet though. It's more so for him. It's getting the takedowns for him and then working his offense on the ground, because he does have a pretty good jiu-jitsu game to go along with it. So for Holbrook here, I think he has to do that really. I mean, if these guys test each other on the chin, who knows? It's whoever's chin holds up best, I guess, because either one of these guys could probably clip each other and knock each other out here. But I think it's going to be Holbrook looking for some takedowns along the way. And Gowdy's takedown defense is okay, but he has been put on his back and he's been controlled in the past as well. And I think Holbrook's probably going to look to do exactly that. So not confident in this pick by far. I mean, it's a very difficult fight to choose, again, because of these guys, because of their defensive flaws really more than anything else. But I'm going to slightly lean towards Holbrook to get the W here. I think his ground game is going to be effective enough that he gets Gowdy in a little bit of trouble. So the pick is Holbrook to win, but not a confident one.
And while both of these guys have bad chins, it's Holbrook's that is the most concerning, because Gowdy's actually a decent striker with good fundamentals and technique. Holbrook, in his 2 losses so far, he's been finished and knocked out in the first minute of his UFC fight. So Gowdy definitely has the potential to just put him away quickly. That being said, while Gowdy has a bad chin, he also is not particularly good on the ground. He's definitely just more of a pure striker, and when people get him down, they can put him away. He was hurt on the feet and then submitted by Pekellin in his debut against Aubin Mercier. In his second fight, he got taken down 3 times, and eventually he got submitted in the 3rd round. So that's what I'm most worried about, is the fact that Mercier was able to get the submission. And I think Holbrook is a better submission fighter than Mercier, but he's not as good of a wrestler. So what Holbrook needs to do is what he's been able to do in his wins in the UFC is close the distance, drag this fight to the floor, get a submission, or try to drag this out and get a decision. And that's probably what happens here. But if Holbrook does not get the takedown, I think he is going to be in big trouble on the feet because he just can't take a punch. And Gowdy, while he doesn't have good chin either, at least he can dish it out a little bit better with much cleaner technique. So I'm leaning Holbrook. I think he gets the takedowns. I think he gets a submission. But if he doesn't get the takedown, he's in huge, huge trouble and he could be finished. So I'm not confident, but I'm picking Holbrook. Now, moving up to the light heavyweight division, we have Bohan Mihajlovic, who is 10-5, taking on UFC newcomer Abdul Karim Edilov, who is 16-4. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I open Edilov minus 505, the comeback on Mihajlovic at plus 335. Right now over 5 dimes. It is currently with Edilov minus 620, the comeback on Mihajlovic at plus 460. So minus 500, not quite big enough. People are coming in, betting him straight, putting him in parlays as well. I mean, the writing's on the wall here overall. Edilov is being brought in. I mean, he's a hyped Russian prospect that a lot of people are expecting to do great things in the UFC. So, I mean, why not give him a guy that's coming off a couple, terrible losses, knockout losses, and feed him, an easy win in his debut. Edilov, I should mention this right off the rip. I mean, he was supposed to come in a long time ago in the UFC and make his debut because the UFC's had him under contract for a while now, but he did get busted for steroid use, I believe, or, something he got nailed for as far as USADA goes. So he was suspended for a while. Now he's finally making his debut. So even before he made his UFC debut, the guy got popped by USADA. So that's something to keep an eye out on, I guess. But outside of that, I mean, he really doesn't need to be doing that if he wants to even, to defeat Mihajlovic here. I think that stylistically, he's just better across the board. I mean, if you worry about anything with Mihajlovic, it's really his power. He does have a little bit of power. He's a brawler, so he's going to look to, try to clip Edilov's chin here. But outside of that, I think Edilov is the better striker. I think Edilov is the better ground fighter overall. So anywhere this fight takes place, I mean, again, I said the writing's on the wall for a reason. This is a setup fight, in my opinion. Get Edilov a pretty decisive win, probably a highlight reel win, and then just keeping him moving up the ladder a little bit. So that's exactly what this fight is. So if you're going to bet this fight, I understand maybe some people throwing him in parlays early on. For me, I would stay away from it. I mean, especially where the line is now. You never know. I mean, Edilov, again, he's been suspended, coming off suspension, making his debut, all the octagon jitters or whatnot, but they did give him a very winnable fight, and he should get the job done. So my pick is going to be Edilov to win, and probably inside maybe round 1, round 2. I think he gets a finish here along the way.
Yeah, Edilov definitely is a hyped prospect, but he also has a bit of a shady past, not just with the steroids or the drug test that he failed, but also he's the cousin of that, kind of creepy, scary Chechen president, Ramzan Kadyrov. So definitely kind of a scary, shady background with this guy, but he does definitely have talent, and you've seen a lot of the Chechen fighters come out and really make an impressive impact in UFC and Bellator, you name it. So those guys definitely come with a strong grappling base and with a lot of power and ferocity. And that's exactly what this guy brings. I'm not as big of a fan of Edilov on the feet. He's okay. That's not his strength though. He gets takedowns. He gets violent ground and pound, pretty good submissions. This guy gets quick finishes. And I expect that, they kept Mihajlovic around to feed to guys like Edilov to make them look good in their UFC debut. And that's what happens here. Mihajlovic is a lot older. He's slow. He has some power, but he's not particularly scary, and he has not looked good in either of his UFC fights, and he got finished in both. So I expect Edilov puts him away in the first round, either by submission or knockout. I mean, kind of his choice once he gets it to the floor. So my pick is going to be Edilov. I think he wins extremely easily. Now dropping down to the featherweight division, we have Mike Santiago, who is 21-9, taking on Zabit Magomed Sharapov, who is 12-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Magomed Sharapov minus 405. The comeback on Santiago at plus 285. Right now over 5 dimes, Magomed Sharapov is minus 445. The comeback on Santiago plus 355. So another situation where the favorite did get bet up a little bit. People bet him straight. People put him in parlays. Over a very game fighter in Santiago. For those of you guys that aren't familiar with Santiago, he was just on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series and had an impressive win, a finish actually over a guy that most people were betting in Cherico. So Mark Cherico is a very solid fighter, and Santiago went out there and looked great against him. I mean, was able to finish him by strikes, obviously, in the first round. So Santiago is no joke. I mean, it wasn't a flukish finish either for him. I mean, he's the type of guy that's a very well-rounded, savvy vet, been around for a long time, has faced decent competition. He's got good striking, good wrestling, good sub game to go along with it. So there's a lot to like about him. The problem with him is, though, I mean, looking through his past and a little bit deeper in his resume, at fight footage, everything across the board, his takedown defense and sub defense are a little bit flawed. I mean, but he does manage, especially now, he's addressed some of those issues, and he's on, I believe, a 9 or 10 fight win streak, which is very, very impressive because most of those fights have been against solid competition. So he's addressed some of those issues, and he's getting better, and he's got confidence right now too. So Santiago is no easy out, and he's still coming in at plus 355 right now. So that tells you what kind of level Magomed Sharapov is really on right now. I mean, he's a hyped Russian prospect, ultra hyped Russian prospect, I should say. Tons of skill and potential. I mean, really, he's a killer on the feet, killer ground and pound as well. He's got solid wrestling. He's got good IQ. He's got good training partners. I mean, working with Mark Henry, working with Frankie Edgar and crew. I mean, the guy is really surrounding himself by a lot of outstanding people and training partners and coaches, and they do nothing but really, I mean, just say how good this kid is and how much potential he has at age 26 as well. So Magomed Sharapov is definitely a very good fighter. And again, he's a big favorite for a reason here over Santiago. And I do think he gets the job done here. And this is a guy, Santiago, that I do have a lot of respect for. He actually made me money in his last fight. So I do respect that. But in this fight, I mean, matchups are everything. And I think he's outclassed here. I think anywhere the fight takes place here, Santiago is going to be in trouble because Magomed Sharapov is just a little bit better. I think he's a better striker. I think he's going to be on top if the fight does go to the ground. I think he's got a better overall ground game as well. So it's going to be a tough fight for Santiago, but he's game enough that I think he's going to hang in there and he's going to make it at least interesting. So another spot where betting right now, if you're going to lay 4.5 to 1 over Santiago, I don't really recommend it, even though Magomed Sharapov is definitely a talented fighter and I think he's going to get the win. I just think it's a pass situation here because I wouldn't really bet the dog here either. But I certainly wouldn't lay the juice and lay the chalk on Magomed Sharapov here either. So watch this fight, enjoy it because you have two talented young fighters that are proving, they want to prove at least that they belong in the UFC on the roster, and it's going to be fireworks. So my official pick is going to be Magomed Sharapov. I think he's, going to look impressive against a very solid fighter and, start his UFC career off on the right foot, but it should be a great fight. I'm looking forward to it.
The difference between these two fighters is pretty striking. Both of them have really good power on the feet, but Santiago is the type of guy that more sits down on his punches and just swings hard and can almost so hard that he can kind of knock himself off balance. So I don't think Santiago's footwork is that great. I don't think his technique is that great. He hits really hard and he swings heavy. So, Magomed Sharapov has to be on his, on guard, but Magomed Sharapov, if you watch him fight, he is not reckless. He's very patient. He waits for his openings and he trains with such great strikers like Marlon Moraes, Edson Barbosa, Frankie Edgar, works with Mark Henry. So I'm not worried about Magomed Sharapov striking at all. This guy is legit. People have been hyping him up. He's long for the division. He's tall for the division. I mean, he is a very, very talented prospect in the featherweight division. This is an extremely tough fight for Santiago, even if he had a full training camp and full preparation, and he does not. He fought, 2 weeks ago, and now he's taking this fight on like 5 or 6 days notice. This is going to be a very, very difficult opponent for him, and he's going to have to travel across the ocean. So I'm definitely thinking this is going to be a tough one for Santiago. Just with the way that he gets himself off balance with how hard he swings, that works fine if he's able to kind of stalk his opponent down from the cage center, get him against the fence, and then just start unloading with big shots when they're not able to get away. But Magomed Sharapov is a very seasoned striker, has good control of distance, mixes things up really well. I just don't see Santiago walking him down like he was able to do in his Contender Series fight. And Santiago isn't going to try to get this fight to the floor and maybe expose Magomed Sharapov's ground game because he isn't that good on the ground himself. He's been submitted 8 times. So if this fight goes to the floor, honestly, it's probably because Magomed Sharapov drops Santiago, and then I just would see Magomed Sharapov maybe jumping on a submission or working for a ground and pound TKO. I do think Magomed Sharapov gets a finish here, and I think it's going to be very impressive. This guy is a guy to seriously keep an eye on in the future. So my pick is definitely going to be Magomed Sharapov, even if the line isn't the best. Now moving back up to the light heavyweight division, we have Francimar Barroso, who is 19-5 with 1 no contest, taking on Alexander Wreckage, who is 8-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Up in Wreckage, minus 140, the comeback on Barroso at plus 100, so even money. So minus 140, even money was the opener with a slight lean towards Wreckage. Right now it's minus 125 for Wreckage. The comeback on Barroso is at plus 105. So a lot of margins have tightened up a little bit. 2 action coming into this fight, nothing significant. And it is a tough one. I mean, Barroso is one of those guys I think people are looking to fade right now in the UFC overall. I mean, he's 37 years old. He's, been okay in the light heavyweight division, been a solid fighter, tough out for a lot of fighters, but he's, a guy that you can beat, a winnable opponent for guys that are kind of working up the ladder. So he's almost a gatekeeper type of fighter. Barroso that has honestly probably 1 foot out the door. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised with the loss here. He does get cut. But he is a talented fighter. I mean, he's been around the game for a while, so his stand-up game's okay. He's got a little bit of power with him. He's got some strength overall that he can bully you a little bit at times, pin you up against the cage. He can get some takedowns. I mean, that's what helped him win his last fight, actually, was his takedown game. I believe he landed, if I'm not mistaken, 7 takedowns in his last fight against Stewart, which he was the underdog in that fight as well. And that's what ended up helping him earn the win there. So here against Wreckage, he's going to want to do the same thing. He's going to want to get Wreckage down and not mess around with him on the feet, because that's exactly what Wreckage is best at. He's a long-rangey fighter. He's still a little raw and he's improving, but he does have a complete game. I mean, he's very dangerous on the feet, but he also does go for takedowns and has a little bit of sub skill, has some pretty good ground and pound if he does get in top position on the ground as well. So, he is one of these fighters that at age 25 is constantly improving, and a lot of people were wanting to see him make his official debut. I mean, he's a talented fighter that he could make a run in the light heavyweight division as well. So it all starts here for him. I mean, if he's able to stay off his back against Barroso, he's going to win this fight. And I think overall, his takedown defense, I think, will be a little bit better, because I guarantee you he's been working and drilling it as much as he possibly can for this fight in particular to make his UFC debut. So I think he's going to give Barroso a tough time with the takedowns, defend him pretty well. And then on the feet, I think he's going to be landing his effective punishment with that reach, utilizing some of that reach and length that he does have. And if he gets on top of Barroso, I think Barroso is going to be in a world of hurt on the ground as well. So it's a close line because, again, I mean, this is a huge step up for Wreckage as far as competition level goes. But at the same time, I think he can get the job done here. We'll see. If Barroso out-wrestles him, he wins. If not, he's going to lose. So my pick is Wreckage to get the W here. I think he's going to make a successful UFC debut, but it's another tough one to bet, honestly. I think you got to be cautious approaching this fight, because I could see realistically him getting put on his back enough and maybe losing on the scorecard. So Wreckage is the pick. Just be careful out there which way you're betting.
I really like Wreckage's striking. I mean, this guy is a kickboxing background. His Muay Thai is just nasty. If he can just start unloading strikes, he has good technique, he has power, he has the pace that can really frustrate Barroso and probably knock him out. I mean, Barroso's getting up there in age. He's not exactly the most fleet of foot. He's not the most explosive, but he's been effective, and he can kind of slow fights down and, just kind of grind him to a halt. And that's kind of how Barroso wins, if he can force his opponent to fight his fight, which would be, if he can get takedowns, if he can get this to the clinch, if he can more make it a measured fight. Wreckage is going to want to close the distance and just start popping him with elbows and knees, or maybe keep it at kickboxing range and start blasting with long kicks and straight punches. Wreckage is an exciting striker, so Barroso needs to take him out of that game. with clinches, with takedowns, you name it. He cannot afford to fight a prolonged stand-up fight, I don't think. Wreckage is not the most experienced, though. Pretty much all of his fights have been taking place in Europe. He's from Austria, which isn't exactly a hotbed for MMA. So, and Barroso, he's out of Brazil. He's been a guy at Nova União, so he's getting good training, even though they don't have a lot of heavier fighters. But he's been effective, and he's definitely got the experience edge on Wreckage. It's just, Barroso seems more like the guy that's the test of UFC newcomers to see if they're good enough to do something in the light heavyweight division more than anything. So this is kind of a barometer fight to see what Wreckage is capable of. And I think that Wreckage can win it. I think he can knock him out. I think he could win a decision if it stays standing. So I'm leaning Wreckage. I think he's a pretty solid prospect in the light heavyweight division. He passes the eye test from what I've been able to see in fights. And I'm a little worried about what happens if Barroso can clinch and get takedowns. But I think Wreckage can pull this out. So I'm leaning his way. I'm going to pick him to win. Now, dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Rustam Habulov, who is 21-3, taking on Desmond Green, who is 20-5. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Up in Habulov at -210, the comeback on Green at +160. Right now, looking over at 5 dimes, it is currently Habulov at -300. The comeback on Green is +250. So this is another spot where early action did come in on Habulov. I mean, he's definitely the more respected, lightweight fighter in the UFC roster. Green had an impressive performance in his last fight. I mean, a lot of people, I think, were counting him out against Emmett, and he proved that he belongs in the UFC lightweight division, even though he's fought in the past at featherweight as well. I mean, it looks like he's really comfortable right now, and his physique's filled out. He's strong. He's showing a lot of good things. I mean, his cardio, conditioning, everything across the board for Green at lightweight seems to be like a good move. And especially, like I said, making a successful debut against a very, very difficult opponent like he did against Emmett. I mean, and he was great in that fight. So here's part 2, because Habulov is even a bigger step up. But the UFC is definitely respecting Green by even giving him this matchup. I mean, Habulov, again, outside of the top few fighters in the lightweight division, the guy's right in the title mix always. I mean, you got to consider him top of the food chain when it comes to UFC lightweights. With that wrestling game, it's outstanding. I mean, Habulov is such a good grinder. His stand-up game's not really that bad either. I think here, though, he doesn't want to mess with Green too much on the feet. I think Green is getting confident in his striking. He's got a little bit more pure knockout power, and he's just got a little bit more talent on the feet, period, over Habulov. So Habulov will hang on the feet, but I think what he wants to do is get Green put on his back and then just kind of grind him like he always does. Even maybe a suplex here or there won't hurt. We haven't seen Habulov deliver those signature suplexes in a long time, it seems. But I'm just saying that's what he has to do. He has to concentrate on getting Green on the ground and then just kind of grinding him out for 3 rounds and winning the fight that way. I think it's very possible, and I think he probably is going to do that. So I'm going to pick Habulov to win, but I'm not as confident in all the people out there that are betting this fight. I mean, Green has shown a lot of improvement, and I know he's been around for a while, and a lot of people might think, I mean, we know what Green's about. He's been put on his back in the past and been controlled. It's going to happen to him again. But I think he has been putting in the work, and he's gotten better, honestly. I mean, across the board, that's why you're seeing him where he's at right now. And I think he's going to give Habulov some fits. So hard to pick against Habulov right now, especially in the matchup. But again, I wouldn't lay that chalk here either. I think -300 is definitely too high. I think it is a dog or pass situation. And I think we are going to see eventually some sharp action come in on Green, and the line will probably drop back down. Maybe not to where the opener was at -210, but we could see it about 2.5 to 1 or so. So I think you are going to see a drop in the prices sometime, at least before the fight starts. But the official pick is Habulov, and he should win by out grinding Green. But again, not a chalk worthy play in my opinion.
Green is typically the guy that grinds out opponents. He has that good wrestling style, and he's well-rounded enough that he can kind of dictate where the fight takes place. But against Habulov, that's not really the case. Habulov is a very good wrestler. As Nick mentioned, he has those crazy suplexes. He's insanely strong, has kind of a good, even though he's out of Russia, it's more of a Greco-Roman style of wrestling almost, where he just gets a hold of you and then just starts throwing you around. I mean, it's extremely impressive. He has crazy core strength. Green is a good wrestler, but I don't think he can withstand that. There have been a lot of good wrestlers that Habulovs have been able to just toss on their head. That being said, Green is a bit of an underrated striker. I think his stand-up is pretty good, and Habulov is not the best if he's forced into stand-up exchanges. And I think Green might be able to outstrike him. So that is something to keep an eye on, especially maybe in a live betting scenario where Habulov is having trouble getting takedowns. Green instantly becomes a very live dog, in live betting. So, that being said, I do think that Habulov's wrestling is good enough to overwhelm Green's takedown defense, but on the feet, Green is definitely going to be holding his own. He has a bit of pretty decent pop in his hands. He's, I think, the more technical striker, although Habulov probably has a little bit more power, although he's more wild and does some more unorthodox stuff with a lot of spinning attacks and just some goofy stuff that a lot of those Russians like to do on the feet. So, that being said, if this fight goes to the ground, Habulov has good top control. He's very strong. He can stay in top position. He has pretty good ground and pound. So I think Green could get just kind of big brothered a little bit in this fight. But Green could be a live dog if the takedowns are not coming for Habulov. That being said, I think the takedowns are coming. So I think Habulov gets us to the floor and probably wins a decision. So my pick is going to be Habulov, but I'm not insanely confident about it, even though he's a pretty big favorite. Now, sticking with the lightweight division, we have Michel Prazeres, who is 22-2, taking on UFC newcomer Mads Bernal, who is 8-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Up in Prazeres, minus 385. The comeback on Bernal at plus 265. Right now, over 5 times, we're seeing Prazeres minus 360, plus 300 on Bernal. So line margins have tightened up again, and two-way action is coming into this fight. Man, this should be a good fight because these guys have a lot of similarities about them. I know, and that's something to be said, considering Prazeres, in my opinion, is another guy that's kind of top rated as far as the lightweights go. I mean, the guy has a complete game. He's a little bit underestimated at times, and I've done it myself, honestly, because Prazeres is just so small, and it seems like he doesn't blow you away with anything. Like I know he has got a dominant ground game. I mean, the guy's like a little tank, and we've seen recently his striking improve, I mean, greatly. I think he's definitely a threat on the feet now as well. And his win over Berkman, I mean, that was impressive too. He just steamrolled Berkman, and I know Berkman's getting up there in age, but that being said, I mean, Prazeres has been more impressive fight by fight by fight. He's getting better. He's just getting more dominant. So, you know, you just don't think of Prazeres as that kind of fighter. At least I don't, but he is getting to that level. I mean, the guy's definitely a very, very difficult out amongst the lightweight division. So making your UFC debut against a guy like that, very, very difficult. But Bernal's the type of guy that, I mean, he does a lot of the same things. He's more of your grinding type of fighter as well. He looks for takedowns. He looks to control the ground game, and he's very capable of doing so against most competition. Now, I should mention that he does fight back and forth between featherweight and lightweight. So recently he's been fighting a little bit more lightweight, and that's why he's taking this at lightweight as well. But that's something to be said as well, because Prazeres, I don't think, can drop down to the featherweight division. So he's going to be physically a little bit bigger, stronger, not taller, of course. He's going to, Prazeres is going to be at a reach disadvantage, which he almost is every fight. But that being said, Bernal does have that physical advantage as far as height goes, over Prazeres, so he could maybe utilize some of that reach. But getting it to Bernal a little bit more, I mean, he is taking this fight on short notice. He is a very young, undefeated prospect. I believe he's 23 years old. So overall, I mean, he's strong. He's got a good, complete game. He seems to be more of your grinding type of fighter. He looks to do damage once on the ground with his wrestling. He gets top position. He drops some ground and pound. He also looks for subs, and he has a pretty effective sub game to go along with it as well. On the feet, he's a bit unorthodox. I mean, he's not as smooth or not as confident on the feet as he is on the ground, and it shows still. I mean, at age 23, again, he's still developing that skill. But he's not bad. I mean, he does have some movement and some ability on the feet that can make things interesting. But stylistically, this matchup in his debut against a guy like Prazeres is a very tough one. So I do think Bernal can win some fights in the UFC. He might even want to drop down to the 145, the featherweight division, and have a little bit more success there possibly with his grinding style. But against Prazeres, I think wherever the fight takes place, Prazeres should have the edge. So in my opinion, the only way Bernal can win this fight is if he does take Prazeres down and grind him out. And we have seen that in the past. I mean, Prazeres has been put on his back and outgrinded, but those have been more elite level type of grinders as well that have done that to Prazeres. So making his UFC debut on short notice, I'm having a little bit of a hard time believing that Bernal is going to be able to accomplish that same thing. So the pick is Prazeres. I think the guy's going to look good. Bernal is going to be game as well. But I think Prazeres is just a little bit too much for him right now. So he's going to get the W.
Yeah, I think this one's pretty straightforward. Bernal and Prazeres have very similar styles, and I just think it's a terrible stylistic matchup for Bernal. I mean, Bernal likes to get fights to the floor. He likes to go for submissions and ground and pound. Problem is, he doesn't have as good a wrestling as Prazeres. He's not as strong as Prazeres. His submissions aren't as good as Prazeres. His ground and pound isn't as good as Prazeres. And Bernal's weakness is on the feet. Prazeres isn't great on the feet, but he's respectable enough to, throw some big shots and kind of get his opponents to think about the stand-up enough to get takedowns. And Bernal really doesn't even do that. So there's not really one area in this fight that Bernal has an advantage other than maybe reach. But Prazeres does a good job of getting inside on opponents that have reach on him. And Bernal, again, isn't a striker, so he doesn't even know how to use the reach. So I think Bernal is actually a talented fighter. This is just a horrible, horrible stylistic matchup for him. And he's taken the fight on short notice. So, I mean, as Nick mentioned, he has fought at featherweight before. Maybe he decides to go to featherweight after the UFC debut. I know a lot of people, the UFC kind of gives them a get out of jail free card, even if they get stomped in a UFC debut if they take the fight on short notice. And honestly, I think Bernal might get stomped here. I mean, it's just, there's not one area that he really has the advantage. I mean, maybe Prazeres can fade late in fights. He's done that before, but even in recent fights, he's improved that part of his game. So, and with Bernal taking the fight on short notice, that probably gets thrown out the window. So I just really like Prazeres here. I think he wins convincingly. Maybe a stoppage. He's not typically a guy that gets a lot of stoppages. He usually just gets top position and grinds fights down and gets decisions. So probably a decision victory for Prazeres unless he can really get overwhelming position on the ground. So my pick is definitely going to be Prazeres here. Now, sticking with the lightweight division again, we have Mirbek Taisimov, who is 25-5, taking on Felipe Silva, who is 8-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Up in Taisimov, minus 190, the comeback on Silva at plus 150. And right now it is actually Taisimov minus 260, the comeback on Silva plus 200. So Taisimov, an extremely popular fighter, especially at the betting window. I'm not surprised the line moved up a little bit. I think they are disrespecting Silva a little bit. I think Felipe Silva has looked really good. I mean, he's only had one fight in the UFC thus far, but that being said, if you look back at his footage throughout his career against some lower level competition, obviously as well, but I mean, you could tell the guy definitely has some talent and he's a threat. So Taisimov, though, I mean, the guy is, you want to talk about well-rounded skill set. I mean, the guy can do it all. He's got outstanding striking. He's got speed. He's got power. He's got really good technique. He's got good accuracy. And then his ground game. I mean, if he wants to wrestle and get the fight to the ground, more times than not, he can do that. Very effective ground game as well. His ground and pound can be nasty. So this guy is a future title contender, no doubt, in the lightweight division. I mean, he's got that kind of skill. But to me, I think he's just always been a little bit overrated throughout his career. And I mean, with all that said, I mean, I just basically was bragging about how good the guy is, but I still think he doesn't, I mean, even though he should have some hype behind him and some respect, I think the public bettors out there think a little bit maybe more than they should about him as far as in high regards, holding him in that high of regard. I think he's definitely got some flaws. One of them being he does tend to slow down as the fight goes on at times a little bit too. On the feet, I think he can get tagged. He can get lit up a little bit if you pressure him the right way. And I think Silva, especially in the clinch, is going to give him a lot of problems if it does stay standing. So it's all, to me, it comes down to Taisimov getting takedowns and being able to control and outgrind Silva on the ground. If he's able to do that, he's going to probably get the W. If it stays standing, even though Taisimov is an outstanding striker in his own right, has a lot of power, he can finish most, I think Silva beats him on the feet, and I think he does light him up at times as well. So getting into to Silva a little bit more, he does have a kickboxing background. I mean, so he is an elite level type of striker. He's got decent BJJ to go along with it, though. So if you do get him on his back, I mean, it's not like he's just a kickboxing type of striker that has no jiu-jitsu game. I mean, he has sub people off his back as well. Now, the level of Taisimov, no. I mean, this is a step up in competition for sure. So Taisimov, I think, can probably avoid getting submitted by Silva, but you got to, keep that in your back pocket if you're Silva and know that you're capable of doing that. What impresses me the most about Silva is his strong clinch game. I mean, he gets inside on you, he wraps, his hands around you, he gets you in that tie plum, and he just goes to work. And not just that, even if you put him on his back, if you notice his defense, once he's on his back, he wraps his right hand around your neck, and man, that grip that he has, and he pushes your neck towards his chest, it just makes life miserable for you because you can't do much. You can't be effective with your ground and pound. You can't look to pass. So you have to kind of almost give up position a little bit, or maybe, maneuver and do things a little bit different. And Silva gets an opportunity to get back to his feet or look for submission. So I think he could be very effective even if put on his back defensively, to the point where Tysonov is going to have some problems there and not unload his ground and pound. So I think this is a very intriguing matchup. I think this is two guys that, again, could be potential title contenders at one point. I know Silva, again, only his second fight in the UFC. He's 33 years old. So the time is now for him. He's got to get these quality wins and move up that ranking. For Tysonov, if he wins this fight, unfortunately for him, it's just going to be another notch in his resume. I don't think he's going to get the respect he should over a victory like Silva. So this is an important fight for both men here. I'm actually going to go against the grain. I know a lot of people are picking Tysonov to win. I think Silva's going to do enough to keep this fight upright. Even if he does get put on his back, I think he manages to get back on the feet. And on the feet, I think he does have an advantage. So I'm going to pick Silva to beat Tysonov, whether it's on the cards, whether maybe as it goes, he ends up landing on Tysonov, which is going to be hard to do, but I don't think it's going to be impossible for him though. So I think it's a dog or pass situation for sure here. And I'm actually going to pick Silva to pull off the upset win and get a quality second win in his UFC career.
I was really impressed with Felipe Silva in his UFC debut about a year ago. I mean, this guy swings with violent intent and he has heavy hands. And he looked great against Shane Campbell. I mean, he put him away quickly. That's exactly what you're supposed to do in a UFC debut against kind of a lower tier UFC lightweight. And Felipe Silva is a guy that you definitely cannot sleep on. This guy is dangerous. He's very good on the inside. He's kind of like a buzzsaw with just some really good Muay Thai and a lot of power. Mirbek Tysonov, on the other hand, though, I mean, this guy has really looked sharp in the UFC with that one loss to Prazeres when he was sick, which has kind of lowered his stock a little bit, but since then he's won 4 straight. The one issue I have with Tysonov is his victories might look better than they actually were, because only 4 of those wins were against guys that aren't even in the UFC. 4 of his 5 wins in the UFC. Granted, the one victory over a UFC opponent was Alan Patrick, and he destroyed Alan Patrick, and Patrick is a pretty good lightweight. So Tysonov is still a bit untested in the UFC against top competition. He definitely hasn't faced like a top 15 or even top 20 lightweight yet, but I really like what I see out of him. He's explosive. He has a ton of power, and he can get in and crack you before you get a chance to hit him back, which I think is the most dangerous part of his game. He also is well-rounded. Typically, he likes to just stand and destroy his opponents, but if he's facing a good striker, he does have wrestling to fall back on. You saw it against Tai Hyung Bang in his UFC debut, a guy that was known for having heavy hands, and Tysonov was able to get 3 takedowns, I believe, and get an easy decision. He also picked up 2 takedowns against Christodoulou, I believe, in his 4th UFC fight. So, this guy definitely is capable of getting takedowns. He's well-rounded enough. And if Silva's giving him problems on the feet, that's what he can fall back to, because the ground is not one of Silva's strengths. Silva will have a reach advantage, although again, he likes to hit from the inside for the most part and swing, hooks. So he wants to kind of get this into boxing range, get it into the phone booth even. So, and he wants to kind of more of a brawl, while Tysonov wants to kind of pick his spots, get in, get out. So I think this will be a really great stylistic matchup. It'll be interesting to see who can impose their will, because I think Tysonov wants to get that big, cracking shot from the outside, while Silva wants to just throw big combinations on the inside, and Tysonov might want to get this to the floor. So the fact that Tysonov is more well-rounded is what speaks out to me, because if Silva is getting the better of him on the feet, I think Tysonov can always take this to the floor and get the decision there, which is a good fallback plan if the stand-up isn't working. But I think the stand-up could work. I think he's going to be playing with fire a lot more, but I do think Tysonov could knock Silva out. You got to remember, Silva is 33 years old, and he's only fought once in the UFC. Tysonov is definitely the younger fighter, the more explosive fighter, and I definitely think he has more potential. So I'm going to side with Tysonov. I think that he still has a very bright future, and he might be able to get an impressive finish against Silva, as long as he doesn't get suckered into a brawl and get into extended phone booth exchanges. So my pick is going to be Tysonov. Now, moving on to the final bout of the preliminary card, we have a welterweight contest between Darren Till, who is 14-0-1, and Bohan Velichkovich, who is 15-4-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Up until minus 150, the comeback on Velichkovich at plus 110. Right now it's till minus 185, Velichkovich plus 160. So no love for Velichkovich. I'm used to it by now. I think a lot of people seem to I don't know. I mean, they just don't think he's a good fighter for any crazy reason, because I think either that's definitely wrong. Velichkovich is a very solid fighter, but in this case against Till, he's 24 years old. I mean, he's been a high prospect even before he came to the UFC, and then in his UFC career so far, he's looked great. I mean, the guy's definitely a talented fighter. His only setback was obviously him when he faded and had a tough fight and ended up being a draw against Dalby. But outside of that, he's looked really good. I mean, Till has some length. He's a southpaw. He's effective on the feet. He's got power. He's got wrestling. He's able to utilize both because he does go for takedowns when he needs to. He's got good ground and pound. So he's definitely a very talented fighter. But you could say a lot of the same things with Velichkovich. In fact, here, Till's not going to have a reach advantage. In fact, I think Velichkovich might have a couple inches of pure reach on him. Velichkovich is also a southpaw. And he has a decent ground game to go along with it. So Velichkovich has been put on his back, and people have been able to grind him out a little bit and control him. But I think that Till might get a takedown or two along the way, but I'm not sure if it's going to be enough. In my opinion, I like Velichkovich here as well. I know, I've been on him a couple times recently, and he's came through for me. And I'm not on him for that reason here as well, but I just think that Till might be getting a little bit too much respect as well. I've said that about Tysonov. I think that you could say that the same thing, and maybe not as much respect as Tysonov gets, obviously, but still, Till, I think, gets a little bit more respect than he should. He's a good fighter. He's got a lot of potential. I think he's going to keep on improving. And if he does beat a fighter like Velichkovich, I think he's going to, he elevates his game to a whole nother level, because I think he's going to get a lot of confidence by that as well. And then, to me, Velichkovich is a very solid fighter, and that's a quality win. So I'll take my hat off to him if he could get this W, and he might. I mean, it is a definitely close fight. It's a competitive fight. I think it's going to be a 3-round type of war with either guy being able to finish it along the way, honestly. I mean, both these guys are tough to finish, but both these guys offensively are capable of finishing as well. So that's what makes this fight intriguing. I mean, we'll probably realistically see a 3-round war, but I think, again, along the way, I wouldn't be surprised to see a stoppage either way. So I'm going to pick Velichkovich to pull off the upset here. I know it's not a very popular opinion, but I do think that, I mean, the opponents that he's faced throughout his career, even before he came to the UFC, I mean, he trains with a good camp. Just a lot of good things you could say about Velichkovich. And again, he just flies under that radar. People don't give him the credit and respect he deserves. So I think he's a very talented fighter, and I think he matches up pretty well with Till. And I think he's more than capable of pulling off the win. So my pick is Velichkovich to win, probably a close grinding type of decision.
I think this fight's very close. The main thing here is I think Darren Till is more likely to get a finish if a finish does happen. Till has more power. I think Till has a bit of a better pace that he can push in the fight, but Velichkovich makes up for that by being well-rounded with pretty good overall defense everywhere, and Velichkovich has the better conditioning. He can come on strong late in fights after opponents kind of wear themselves out with takedowns and strikes. So this is just a really interesting matchup, because Till has had fights where he started really strong, wasn't able to get the finish, and then faded horribly. And if that kind of happens here, Velichkovich could get a 3rd-round finish. I mean, remember what happened in the Dalby fight where Till was destroying Dalby and then got 10-8'd, maybe even 10-7 in the 3rd round, and ended up getting a draw. Velichkovich, he got taken down a couple times by Michael Graves and then came on strong late, stuffing takedowns and dishing out damage. So this is definitely a guy you can't sleep on, especially with how strong he can come on. He trains out of Colorado in elevation, so he is definitely going to have the conditioning edge. So if he just tries to make this a high tempo fight, there's a good chance that he could win the 3rd round, which potentially could be the deciding round for a decision. That being said, I do like Darren Till. His power is evident. He's added some takedowns to his game a little bit. His ground game is improving. Granted, I don't think it's as good as Michael Graves, and Graves had some takedown success early against Velichkovich, but could not keep that up. So Till, I can definitely see him winning early. It's just he either needs to get a finish or he needs to win the first 2 rounds and then hold on. And that's not the easiest thing to do against Velichkovich, who can really turn it up in the 3rd round when you're sucking wind. So I'm leaning Till, but I'm not crazy confident. Till is 24 years old, and this is a kid that is constantly improving, and he could have added even more to his game since we last saw him in May, I believe. So, very interesting fight. I think Till is the more dangerous fighter, so I'm going to side with him, but I'm definitely worried about Velichkovich coming on straight. Just coming on late, I mean. So, my pick is Till, but not crazy confident. Now, sticking with the welterweight division and kicking off the main card, we have Leon Edwards, who is 13-3, taking on Bryan Barbarina, who is 13-4. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Edwards minus 315, the comeback on Barbarina at plus 235. Right now it's Edwards minus 270, the comeback on Barbarina is at plus 230. Interesting. I mean, it's been two reaction coming into this fight as well. Edwards got bet up. Now he's starting to get bet down a little bit. Barbarina's just a warrior, and people do respect that. I mean, the guy's never out of a fight. The UFC has done nothing but feed Barbarina tough, difficult opponents, fights that he should not win. And he's been coming off wins. He's been winning. He's been beating people. He's been pulling off upsets over very quality level competitors. So, I mean, it's one of those things where you watch Barbarina fight, and honestly, for me, I'm not overly impressed, honestly. I mean, he's a very solid fighter. His stand-up's okay. He's got a little bit of power. I mean, he has a ton of heart. He's not great at, wrestling. He's just not great anywhere, but he just pushes such a high pace, and he has a heart. You can't get rid of it. I mean, how he is in round one, he's going to be in round three as well. Like, he's going to keep on, trying. He's never going to give up. He's going to keep on trying to beat you until the final bell rings type of situation. And he's pulled off wins over people that, he's had to weather the storm early on. Might be losing early, and then all of a sudden, he picks it up and he starts taking over the fight in round two, round three, and wins those rounds, or even finishes opponents and gets a W here. So that's the type of fighter Barbarina is. He's a warrior, but he's outclassed here severely. I think Edwards is better than Barbarina everywhere. Edwards is by far the better striker. I think Edwards has better wrestling. I think Edwards has a better submission game to go along with it as well. So there's not really an area that Barbarina can beat Edwards in, minus the cardio and maybe, overall heart and the skill and the desire that he has. I mean, in that situation or that level, I shouldn't say skill, because again, Edwards has more skill, but in those aspects with the heart and the cardio and the willingness to just win at all costs, I mean, I think Barbarina is at the top of the food chain when it comes to the UFC roster in those areas. So it's hard to beat him in that. But as far as pure skill set goes, there's no doubt Edwards is the better fighter. And I think it's going to show up here, because Edwards does have a tendency to slow down as the fight progresses at times, especially if he's been in really tough wars. But I think this is the type of fight where he'll be able to control his pace a little bit more. And I think he won't slow down bad enough to suffer a loss against Barbarina, because even if Edwards wins round one and round two, obviously Barbarina might pull off the third round or something like that. I could see possibly happening, but he's going to lose on their scorecards anyway. So I think Edwards gets the job done here. And I think there's a possibility Edwards actually even finishes a tough as nails fighter like Barbarina as well. So I don't know. I mean, this fight should play out pretty interesting, but I think Edwards is going to be the one that gets a W either by stoppage or, like I said, on the scorecard. So if Edwards suffers a loss here, I will be very surprised, because I think he's just, he's on his way, getting over that hump. He's on that line where he could really be a great fighter, an outstanding fighter, a title contender at 170 pounds potentially, but he's got to win fights that he should win, and this is one of them here. So he's definitely trending in the right direction, and this is going to be a solid test for him, but it's one I think he'll pass with flying colors, honestly. So my pick is Edwards to win.
Leon Edwards has picked up wins back-to-back over Albert Tumenov and Vicente Luque, who are both fighters that were, fringe top 15, and this is a massive step down. I'm not trying to, crap all over Bryan Barbarina. He's a talented fighter with some big wins over Warley Alves and Sage Northcutt, but those were fights where he was getting beat on, and then his opponents gassed, and he just took advantage of bad gas tanks and his own toughness. And that's just not going to work most likely against Leon Edwards. Edwards is very well rounded. He has just rounded out his game so well. Now, he is a great striker, Edwards, and he's added wrestling to the point where that might be the best part of his own game. When he entered the UFC, he was all striking. I mean, he had a just violent finish against Seth Baczynski that was in less than 10 seconds, I believe. So, this guy is a great striker with a lot of power, but now he also has excellent wrestling with a solid ground game. I mean, he was able to get a submission against Tumenov. That was crazy impressive in a fight. I believe he was the underdog. So Edwards is a very good prospect in the welterweight division. He's just picked up quality wins over Luque and Tumenov, and Barbarina is just not on his level. He's not as good of a striker. He's not as good of a wrestler. He's just not as good. I mean, Barbarina's biggest strength is his toughness, his, heart, his conditioning, and he's pretty good on the inside with elbows and knees, but I just don't see Edwards giving him those opportunities. The only way I see Barbarina winning this fight is if Edwards hurts Barbarina early, just empties out his gas tank trying to finish him and can't do it, and then maybe Barbarina wins the last 2 rounds or gets a finish or something against a gassed Edwards. But I think Edwards is smart here. He's cautious about what Barbarina is capable of doing, and he just avoids everything Barbarina does, gets takedowns, maybe outstrikes Barbarina if he wants to, and just wins either a decision, most likely a decision because Barbarina is just so darn tough. So my pick is going to be Leon Edwards. I think this is a bit of a cakewalk for him, and he deserves a top 15 opponent. So Edwards is my pick. Now dropping down to the women's bantamweight division, we have Marion Reneau, who is 7-3-1, taking on UFC newcomer Talita Oliveira, who is 5-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Reneau minus 300, the comeback on Oliveira at plus 220. And right now it's currently Reneau minus 325. The Oliveira is at plus 250. So a little bit more action coming in early on Reneau, and I understand it. I mean, the Oliveira is taking this fight on extremely short notice. And I mean, Reneau's a pretty solid fighter. Obviously, we know that. So far in her UFC career, she's faced high-level competition. She's done extremely well against most. So this is a tough fight if you're De Oliveira stepping in on short notice and making your debut against Reneau, especially since she was supposed to face a former champion in De Randami. So, I mean, this is, again, a step down for Reneau, but De Oliveira is definitely not an easy out. I mean, I was impressed by the footage and the research I did on her before I made this line, honestly. But I know she's faced, again, lower-level competition, but the girl does have some skill. She's 5-1. She has basically a wrestling and jiu-jitsu background. She's a BJJ black belt. In fact, I mean, in her wrestling game, I was more than impressed. Again, against weaker competition, but she does have a super nice double leg takedown. And once she gets you to the ground, it's fun to watch her work. I mean, she drops ground and pound. She transitions quickly to subs. I mean, you can tell she thrives on the ground. And if she gets Reneau on the ground and gets top position on Reneau's going to be in some serious trouble. Even though Reneau does have good jiu-jitsu in her own right. I mean, she's been able to get sub wins off her back in the UFC. We've seen that before as well. So it's not like Reneau's a slouch on the ground. She's never been submitted either. But I just think Oliveira does have an edge when it comes to the pure ground game and possibly even wrestling here. I think Reneau should probably be able to keep this fight upright. And if she does keep it upright, she's going to light Oliveira up on the feet. Now, Oliveira does have okay stand-up, but it's still developing. And you could tell that she's not really comfortable throwing on the feet quite yet. It's more of I'll throw a few punches and then I'll look for the takedown and shoot in with a double leg and get you on the ground. That's what she does here. So I think that's what Oliveira is going to look to do, but Reneau is going to look to counter and keep things up on the feet. And if she does, she's going to be able to do damage along the way, possibly even finish Oliveira. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens here, especially on a short notice debut. But if she's not able to finish her, she's going to at least outpoint her on the scorecards as well. So it's hard to pick the rookie here, making her UFC debut, but I kind of hope that she performs well, better than we all expect, because I think she could be a serious player in the bantamweight division and a great addition to the roster. So interested to see if Oliveira's wrestling can definitely work against a good fighter like Reneau. If she gets some takedowns, stays out of submission trouble and wins, I'll be really pleased to see that, because again, we'll have another great addition to the roster. So my pick is going to be Reneau because, again, I do believe that she is the better fighter right now at this stage of her career, but don't sleep on Oliveira. I think she's definitely a talented fighter, and after this fight, win or lose, I'm expecting some good things from her the rest of her career in the UFC, so we'll see how it goes. But right now, the pick is Reneau.
I like Marion Reneau here mainly because Oliveira is very, very amateurish in her stand-up. If she cannot get a takedown, she's going to be a fish out of the water. I mean, I watched almost all of her professional fights so far, and she does not want to stand at all in any of her fights. She basically looks for the takedown the first opening there is. Granted, her takedowns are good, her wrestling is good, her ground game is excellent, but when she stood for even a minute, I mean, it was not even an attempt to do damage whatsoever with any of the strikes she threw. I mean, it was just very basic, straight punch, just trying to find an opening to get a takedown. I mean, there is no intent whatsoever to harm her opponent or score or do anything on the feet. So if Reneau can stuff takedowns, this is going to be a cakewalk for her. That being said, Talita Bernardo Oliveira is a very, very good ground fighter, and her wrestling is above average. She has good explosion with it. She gets top position. She's not overly aggressive when she's there, and she passes guard, looks for submissions and ground and pound. She's a very good ground fighter. Reneau does come from a grappling background. I mean, she's stood up and traded in pretty much all of her fights except one when Jessica Andrade kind of hurt her, and then Reneau ended up triangle choking her off of her back. But for the most part, Reneau just wants to stand and bang. And Oliveira, if that happens, she's in trouble. But if it goes to the ground, I think Reneau can hold her own, but Oliveira does have that wrestling edge, and I expect that she'll be in top position. She just is going to have to be careful because Reneau does have a good triangle choke, and we haven't seen a lot of Reneau's other ground game, but I expect that she's got decent scrambles and she can be a pretty good threat on the ground. We just, again, haven't seen much of it. But she definitely does have it. So, Oliveira wants this to go to the floor, and if it goes to the floor, I think it'll be competitive, maybe a slight edge to Oliveira, but on the feet, this is a landslide for Reneau. So, and the fact that Oliveira is taking this fight on short notice, she's flying in from Brazil, I'm definitely concerned about that. So I have to side with Reneau. I know she's getting up there in years, but she doesn't have a lot of damage taken. So I think even though she's older, Reneau, she doesn't have that fight, that MMA wear and tear that like a fighter that maybe had 20 fights that's her age or 30 fights that's her age will have. So I'm leaning Reneau. I think she gets the win here, but I am a little concerned about what happens if Oliveira gets takedowns in top position. So this will be a really interesting fight to see, and to see potentially if Oliveira can be a good prospect in the bantamweight division. But at least for now, my pick is going to be Reneau. Now moving on to the co-main event of the evening in the middleweight division, we have Sayar Bahadorzada, who is 22-6-1, and he's taking on UFC newcomer Rob Wilkinson, who is 11-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Sayar Bahadorzada minus 150, the comeback on Wilkinson, Mike Wilkinson plus 110. Right now it's Sayar actually at minus 145 and the comeback on Wilkinson's at plus 125. So two-way action coming in this fight. I mean, nothing significant coming in either way. It is a difficult fight, difficult matchup. I mean, if you look at Sayar, he's been one of these guys that he's been out for so long and he's been inconsistent. I mean, his last fight was that win over Thatch, was pretty impressive, but still he's been, not fighting as often as we'd want to see him. He's been injured a little bit as well. So the time off in between bothers me. I think he needs to be a little bit more consistent. He needs to kind of keep his game flowing a little bit because he's definitely a talented fighter at welterweight. But we should mention this fight is going to be a middleweight because Wilkinson is stepping in on short notice and taking this fight. So this is going to be a tough fight, I think, for both gentlemen here. And we'll get into Wilkinson a little bit more. He's an undefeated Australian prospect. I mean, he's taking the fight on short notice. He's got skill in all areas, but really he seems to excel with his takedown game the most. I mean, he's one of those guys that his ground game is where it's at. He's effective using and utilizing his ground game, getting the fight to the ground. Once on the ground and pound, looks for submissions, looks for the finish. I mean, he's a very capable fighter on the ground. His stand-up game is okay, but he does not want to mess with Sayar too much on the feet. Sayar has knockout power. I mean, he's just got that killer instinct, and I think he can give Wilkinson a lot of problems. If you look at Wilkinson in the past, I mean, obviously before he's making this UFC debut, again, his stand-up's okay, but he has been rocked on the feet. He's been wobbled, and he's tough as nails, and he has survived in a lot of those spots and has gone on to win those fights. But that being said, I don't know if he's going to get a second opportunity against a guy like Sayar. So this fight basically comes down to me. If Wilkinson's cardio keeps up and he can continue to look for takedowns and be relentless here against Sayar, he can get the W. If he does not get the fight to the ground as often as I'd like him to, then he's obviously going to probably get lit up by Sayar and possibly get finished. So it all comes down to takedown games. Can Sayar fend off those takedowns, keep off his back, and get the knockout win, or even just batter Wilkinson enough to get the scorecards? Possibly. But I think what we're going to see here is Wilkinson implementing that ground game, implementing that takedown game that has given Sire some problems in the past. And that's really how Sire loses. When he loses fights, it's because people mainly out wrestle him and get him to the ground and submit him there as well. So the ground game, even though his stand-up game or his takedown defense is pretty solid, he still has a weakness in that area, and that's what Wilkinson is going to try to exploit here. So I'm going to go with the upset here. I think Wilkinson, even though it is on short notice, I think that his style and the matchup here, especially going up to middleweight, I think it kind of favors him. And if he doesn't gas out completely and he's able to show some of that toughness along the way, he's probably going to get the win here. So tough debut for a guy like Wilkinson, but I think he can win it. So I'm going to pick Wilkinson to pull off the slight upset win over Sire.
The big issue with Bahadorzada is the fact that he just hasn't fought enough. Injuries, issues with visas, I mean, you name it, he's had problems. And, I mean, even just getting to the UFC in the first place, he had a ton of issues, since he's based out of Afghanistan originally. So, the guy just has kind of been snake bitten in his UFC career, but he's only fought one time since 2013, and that is a monstrous issue. And he's already now into his early 30s. I mean, he's running out of time to make a move in the welterweight division, and now he's moving up to middleweight, which is even more of a problem, I think, because he was not the best welterweight. So, against a guy like Wilkinson, I think he could get bullied a little bit. I mean, Wilkinson is a big, strong middleweight with a pretty good ground game and strong wrestling, and that has been Bahadorzada's kind of kryptonite in the UFC. I mean, you look at his two losses, he faced Dong Hyun Kim and he faced John Howard, and they got takedowns and top position against him for 3 straight rounds. You look, he gave up in the Dong Hyun Kim fight, he gave up 3 takedowns, lost 3 rounds, got passed guard 8 times, just one-sided fight. Against John Howard, he did fine on the feet, but on the ground, Howard got 3 takedowns, passed his guard 6 times. So that's a huge problem. Now, Bahadorzada kind of turned the tide, the tables against Brandon Thatch, but that's because Thatch just doesn't really have a ground game whatsoever, and he was just able to take advantage of that and get a late submission. So this time around, he's facing a guy up a weight class who's bigger and stronger than both John Howard or Dong Hyun Kim, and I think it spells trouble, even if Wilkinson is taking this fight on short notice. I mean, he does have basically a full month to prepare. It was early August when he stepped in. And Wilkinson is a guy that is pretty ferocious in the Australian scene. I know that we don't usually give a lot of credit to the Australian fight scene, but this guy seems legit. I mean, he's 11-0. He's got 9 of those first round finishes, and he has 6 submissions, 4 knockouts. I think just about everything that's happened has either been a TKO on the ground from ground and pound, or he beats guys up on the ground and they give up submissions against him. I mean, this guy is pretty talented. Now, he hasn't fought in about a year, which is a bit of an issue as well, but again, at least he's been active. So, and at 25 years old, I mean, he is a pretty promising prospect, honestly. So I like Rob Wilkinson. I think this is a guy the UFC has kept their eye on for a while, and this was just a perfect opportunity to get him in there. I mean, why else would they put him in the co-main event? I mean, this could be a chance to get crowned a new star or an up-and-comer in the welterweight division, or in the middleweight division. So, and that's the other thing is Bahadorzada's moving up, and he was not, even a big physical welterweight. So I think, he could be in a lot of trouble here. That being said, Wilkinson is not a very good striker, and he doesn't have the greatest chin. I've seen him get rocked a little bit in some fights. So if Bahadorzada can stuff takedowns, he has legit power. I mean, what he did to Paulo Thiago was just downright disgusting in his UFC debut. So if Bahadorzada can stuff takedowns and crack Wilkinson, this fight immediately gets shifted to his favor, and he can definitely get a stoppage. But I don't know if he can stop the takedowns. So I have to side with Wilkinson, even though he's the underdog and on short notice. I just like this stylistic matchup for him a lot better than I like for Bahadorzada. Now, moving on to the main event in the heavyweight division, we have 2 twin towers duking it out as Alexander Volkov, who is 28-6, takes on Stefan Struve, who is 32-8. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Volkov at minus 175 to come back on Struve at plus 135. Right now, looking over at 5 dimes, it is minus 125 for Volkov. The comeback on Struve is at plus 105. So you have the towers at heavyweight going at it here. I mean, two of the tallest guys in the whole sport, really, if you want to talk about MMA in general. I mean, Struve is, I believe, 6'11", and Volkov's like 6'7". So towers with skill. I mean, both these guys are definitely skilled athletes to go along with it. Struve's been in the UFC for a long time, and he's been one of the better heavyweights. There's no doubt about that. I mean, throughout his UFC career has wins. I mean, he has a win over the current champion in Stipe Miocic right now too. So that's the kind of talent that Struve does possess, and he's definitely a skilled fighter. But Volkov, I mean, obviously we know he's a former Bellator champ. I mean, the guy is definitely a very talented fighter in his own right, and he keeps on getting better. He's proven that he's been working on that takedown defense, and that takedown defense is actually getting pretty good. It's getting solid. And that was one of the weaknesses for Volkov. Now, both these guys are a bit chinny. I trust Volkov's chin maybe a little bit more than Struve's right now, but you never know. I mean, I think one solid punch from either guy can definitely end the night either way. I mean, both these guys are that skilled on the feet. I think Struve is a better overall kickboxer. Volkov probably has a little bit more boxing, the better hands of the two as well. But Struve can mix in those kicks and be effective with them as well. Now, if you go to the ground, I think Volkov probably has a better wrestling of the two, but Struve has a better jiu-jitsu game. So it's going to be interesting how that plays off on the ground as well, if they do get to that. So this has been a very difficult test for both guys, a bit difficult fight for me to choose either way as well, because I can see this playing out so many different ways. But in reality, I'm going to give it to the kind of, I don't want to say rookie, but, you know, I mean, Volkov's career in the UFC has been a lot shorter thus far than Struve's. So I think I'm going to give it to Volkov. I think he's going to be able to outstrike Struve enough on the feet, maybe do some damage along the way and finish Struve. So this is a 5-round fight. Obviously 5 rounds a long way to go for both these guys without, making one mistake and maybe getting that chin clipped along the way, or possibly, Struve getting the sub along the way as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens, but I just think Volkov is going to be able to outbox Struve on the feet, and the majority of the fight I think will play out that way as well. It probably stays on the feet. So my pick is going to be Volkov to get the W, but this is truly a pick'em type of fight, and I think we're going to see both guys have their moments throughout the fight. So another tough one to bet, but I am going to pick Volkov to get the W here.
This is a really intriguing matchup. I mean, you got a 6'7" heavyweight against a 6'11" heavyweight. It doesn't happen very often. I think the last time they had like two huge guys, it was like Struve against Travis Brown or Struve against Christian Moorcraft. I mean, these are fun fights. And both of these guys are long. They're dangerous. Struve has a ton of finishes. He's been finished, kind of live by the sword, die by the sword in his UFC career. Volkov is a little bit more methodical, but I just really think this is an intriguing matchup. I mean, Stefan Struve is more dangerous in terms of getting a finish. He has the better ground game. He can get a submission for sure if it goes to the ground, but he doesn't have the best way to get it to the ground. His wrestling isn't very good. I think the only times that he's really forced a submission have been when he like pulled guard against LeVar Johnson and got an armbar type of thing. For the most part, when he goes to the ground, it's because people take him down and then he's wrapping him up with his long legs, looking for triangles and other things. So, on the feet though, Struve does have power and he's filled out his frame. I mean, he's now cutting a significant amount of weight to make a heavyweight. I remember when he was, a string bean at like 240 or something, which was just freaky for a 7-footer. But now, he's definitely getting thicker and stronger, and he can put a little bit more behind his punches, which is something that he should have been. It was just a process for him because he was so young when he first debuted in the UFC. So now he's kind of reaching his potential. And Volkov, he's a guy that I've always been impressed with, going back to his time in Bellator when he became the champ and everything. I mean, this guy has strong boxing fundamentals, good technique. He does have a decent ground game, not great, but I mean, he did choke out Blagoy Ivanov, which was super impressive because Ivanov has beat just about everybody else he's been in the cage against, except Volkov, and Volkov dominated him. So that was a really eye-opening performance for me. But for the most part, Volkov is a guy that is patient. He can just pick apart his opponents, use technique. He doesn't have the most power, but if he does sit down on his punches, he can do some damage. He did get, kind of dominated when he faced his fellow countrymen in Bellator and lost his title. But for the most part, he's been effective. So I think Volkov is very dangerous against Struve if this is just a prolonged stand-up fight. Now, Struve could get a knockout more likely than Volkov, even though I think Struve's chin is worse because Struve is the guy that's kind of more hunting for the knockout. So if he's swinging really heavy, then there's a better chance that maybe he connects and puts Volkov away. But I can definitely see Volkov outpointing Struve, and if the openings are there and Struve's technique is not that great, Volkov could get a knockout as well. I mean, Struve has been knocked out a ton of times in his MMA career, so the potential is definitely there for a finish. So I think, that being said, though, if a finish happens, it's probably Struve that gets it and gets the win. This is a 5-round fight, which is crazy. I don't expect it to go 5 rounds, but Volkov could win a 5-round decision if it does, or Volkov could get a late stoppage if it is a prolonged stand-up fight, and I just see him getting the better of Struve overall. But if it finishes, it probably finishes earlier with a submission or a knockout from Struve. And we haven't really seen a lot out of Struve's conditioning. I mean, we've seen Volkov. I mean, he can go for a pretty extended period of time and he can push a decent pace. Struve, the only time that he's kind of gone into the championship rounds was, I think, Mark Hunt, and he ended up eating a ferocious knockout from Hunt. So I'm interested to see what happens if this goes to the championship rounds, but I would probably favor Volkov, especially maybe with Struve's history of heart valve issues with that he had that probably cost him a significant amount of time in his UFC career. So I'm leaning Volkov, even though I think Struve is the more dangerous of the two of them. But Alexander Volkov is going to be my pick. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 115. Now, our premium bets for the event will be released this Friday following the weigh-ins, so stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsBreaker Premium member. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow @MMAOBPremium on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dime Sportsbook. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.